Hi, Lauren Larkin, host of Sancta Colloquia, and I would like to talk about a book that I recently read, Ute Legends. And it is a book that has been written by Celinda Reynolds Kaelin, and it is essentially a collection of stories. Ute legends, and I focus on the Ute aspect of the Native American mythology because of where I live, which is Colorado, and the territory was Ute territory. It's Ute land. That's where I am now. The illustrations in the book are by Manuel Polido, and Celinda Reynolds Kaelin from here on out. She was kind of adopted into the Ute tribe, or a group of the Utes in this area, and her name was changed to Sunif Mamouche. And I know that I'm going to mispronounce everything. So if you're an expert in pronouncing these names and or titles and concepts, please know that I am willing to be taught. So what I wanted to do is a little bit about the author, and this is taken from the forward by let me just look this up. Forrest Cooch, former executive director, Utah Division of Indian Affairs. And so this is the person who wrote the introduction or the forward to the book. And so I'm going to quote here from the forward. For most of her young years, and the past 20 years in particular, Kaelin dedicated her life to learning about the Ute people, especially the band of the Utes who lived in the area known as the Tabagashe, today referred to as the Uncompahgre. All right. And so this is what is part of her story. And this is what gives her the authority to actually speak about these things. And and that's why I like this book, because it sort of gave me an insight into how these stories are shared and how these stories are articulated, from someone who was an outsider brought in. Celinda Reynolds Kaelin, Sunif Mamouche, is an adopted member of the Northern Ute Nation. She worked as assistant to Northern Ute medicine man Sowa Nanian for over 20 years. Together, they traveled and performed sacred ceremony in the Pikes Peak region and throughout North, Central, and South America. With the World Council of Elders, she carries the sacred pipe and has participated in the sacred dance, Sundance, with her Ute sisters Tatanka Win, the late Loya Arum, and Wani Kenyan Iktomi Win Carrie Sispooch. For 15 years, she resides with her husband, Harold, on a ranch in Tabagashi Ute territory near Tava. That's Pikes Peak. It's in Colorado. So anyway, so that's a little bit about the author, and where she gets her authority to write about these tales and myths and legends. And then what I also wanted to do was talk about the actual, just again, I'm pulling from the forward, give you a little bit about the actual myths and legends themselves. Ute Legends is a masterful work that recognizes and honors the lore of the Ute Indian people, a branch of the Shoshone Nation who, upon acquiring the horse, expanded their territory to include most of the two state areas of Colorado and Utah. Two of the predominant bands of Ute who occupied the lands in Kaelin's work were the Tabagashe and the Yamparika, both Ute bands, now referred to as Uncompahgre and White River, respectively. They were removed to state of Utah in 1881 in response to the Meeker Massacre of 1879. I also know that locally, there was a point in time in the 1800s where a band of the Utes were located here, kind of in this Grand Junction area, and then they had their land taken from them, and they were further removed somewhere else. And so there's just a lot of trauma and violence that has occurred in this area where I'm currently living. And so there's a link. Hold on a second. I'm gonna read some more about the legends. In the Ute Agreement of 1880, the Northern Ute people were dispossessed of their ancestral lands in Colorado and forcibly removed to a reservation in Utah. This included the Ute band of Tava, Pikes Peak. The Pikes Peak Historical Society has established an endowment fund to bring the Tabagashe people of Tava back to their back to their sacred mountain each year. This week of ceremony and visiting is always bittersweet as the people are so emotionally attached to this land of their ancestors. And one of the neat things is that these myths actually articulate deeply that deep link and symbiotic nature and relationship with the land by the Utes. All that I can do is try to build bridges of understanding between our cultures. This is Kaelin writing in the introduction, sort of giving an overview of what's happening with the book. Towards this end, so that my speaking is informed, I have studied Ute history and collected dozens of their legends. I am constantly amazed at the power of these stories. Even first and second graders can repeat them almost verbatim after just one telling. In the traditional Ute way, these stories were only told in the winter by someone called Tugui the storyteller. All right, so that's a little bit of history of how these stories are disseminated, oral tradition, and they're told at a certain time by a certain person who's in charge of sort of keeping it. So for me, that resonated as a priest who is charged with keeping the story of Christ and Christ crucified, and talking about the encounter with God and the events of faith. I'm sort of a story keeper, right? And so I always ascribe that to the role of bishop ultimately in the Episcopal tradition, this idea of story keeping. And so the link with there's a link with Mesoamerica, and we get to engage a deeper in a deeper engagement with the Ute Nation, and to become connected to the history of the land, not told through white eyes and lenses, and which was engaged in colonization, but through the stories of those whose land we're on. Okay, and so I really appreciated that. One other aspect that she speaks about here is she says, unfortunately, she's referring to someone who's written up a history about the Ute group, the Ute band that she's looking at near Pikes Peak. And the the person's name is Powell. And she says, unfortunately, Powell did not understand Ute cosmology when he interpreted these stories. And this is something that's really important. And so she offers at the end of each myth, she gives a reading of what do we take away from this? How do people not Ute re-engage with the story? And what do we learn from it? Where do we see overlaps? It is quite different than our society's Judeo-Christian concept of a male deity up above the earth somewhere presiding over heaven. For the Ute, the supreme being, the creator, is everywhere and within everything. Creator is truly omnipresent. Therefore, creator can communicate with two-leggeds, human beings, through a cloud, an eagle, a tree, a stone, a wolf, etc. And one of the interesting stories that she tells in the introduction is I learned that the wolf is a sign of communication, or is the communicator, because when the wolf shows up, you know something's happening. And so there's this moment where I think it's a wolf shows up, and she just tells this neat story about she's sitting with look, Clifford, she writes, your helpers are saluting you. No, he said, the elk people are telling me about us. We must work together. So in this story, elk show up and they're getting ready to do something. Not understanding the weight of the situation, I replied, oh, thank you so much, but I'm very busy right now. No, he said emphatically, you must work together now. And so when animals show up, the way that they show up, there is a communication. And I like that he said the elk people. So that's what's going on there. And then I wanted to just look at one other aspect. So I want to give you as much background as possible, because I am going to read a couple of the stories. And I have that located there. And then on page 14, at the end of the introduction, she says, therefore, I offer this collection of legends in order to expand and clarify our knowledge of the prehistory of the Ute people, including their origins and cultural affiliations. It will surprise many to see unmistakable links to the Anasazi and to the Toltec Maya. All right. So when you look at the movement of peoples in the into the, like across the Bering Strait into Canada and down into what is called North America now, and up through Mexico, there are links and ties. And she does really well to kind of correlate like this imagery here in this story, or she'll say, this story actually has remnants that you can find in the Mayan culture. And you see how the Anasazi influence here is impacting. So, we have this deep historical connection. not just generational, but gene, like the genes and the DNA correlation between people groups that have gone way, way, way before. Okay, so one of the, and that's why I like the idea of sitting down and reading the legends. I love stories, I love fiction stories, and I definitely read this as I was, I read fiction before I fall asleep at night. But just really, I have been really desiring to want to understand sort of the stories of the land that I'm on. And so that's why I have engaged with this. And I've loved the history and linking it so close with, and her ability to link these stories so closely with Mesoamerica. All right, so the first myth I'm going to read, and so I'm going to show you some of the artwork. This is Rabbit Kills the Sun. I like this story. I picked short ones, so I'm not going to be sitting here reading to you. That would be pointless. However, this story sort of has like creational motifs to it to me, and I'm going to go ahead and read it. A long time ago, the sun was very, very hot, much hotter than it is today. It was so hot that nothing could grow. Rabbit-sized people suffer because of this. I am going off to the place where the sun rises, he's told his family, and I am going to do something about it. Rabbit set off early the next morning, carrying a large club, his pogomogan, over his shoulder. Now, Rabbit had two names. His first, or ordinary name, was Tavuch, but his second name, Tavwich, was sacred. Rabbit became angry if anyone called him by his ordinary name. He only liked his sacred name. As Rabbit walked along, some weeds stood up and smiled. "Good morning, Tavuch. Where are you going?" Rabbit clenched his teeth and raised his club. Bam! Then bam again. He smashed the weed until its green juices ran into the ground. "Why did you hit that man?" the other weed people asked. "Because he called me Tavuch." As Rabbit ambled along to the top of the next mountain, he saw yet another mountain range in the distance. Then he saw someone digging. It was Kuyagat, grizzly bear. "What are you doing?" asked Rabbit in his sweetest, most innocent voice. "I'm digging a hole so that I can hide from Tavuch. I heard that he is coming and that he is mad and killing people. As soon as I see him coming, I'm going to run and jump in my hole." "Oh, that is a good idea," said Rabbit. "Show me how you are going to do this." "This is how I'm going to hide." And with that, Bear ran and jumped into his hole. "How will you know when to jump into your hole?" asked Rabbit. "Oh, when I hear Tavuch coming, I will run and jump." Rabbit asked him to show him his plan again. When he was in his hole, Rabbit asked, "Aren't you going to peek out to be sure that it is Tavuch?" "Yes, I will look out like this." And when Bear raised his head to look, bam! Rabbit hit and killed him, hefting his club onto his shoulder. He continued on his journey. As he was climbing to the crest of the next mountain range, he heard children crying. Looking around, he saw two little winged ones. "My children, why are you weeping?" asked Tavuch. They wiped their tears with their feathers, and the bolder of the two replied, "Good morning, Tavuch." And Rabbit smiled at the use of his sacred name. "We came out with our mother to gather yampa, but as she was digging, a huge boulder rolled off the hillside and buried her. Now we are all alone," he whimpered. "Well, what do you live on? How do you eat?" asked Rabbit. "We are hungry. We eat whatever we find." "Have you any water?" continued Rabbit. "No, every time we go to the stream, it splashes all over us, and then we are cold and wet." Rabbit frowned and asked, "How do you keep warm at night?" "We tried to gather firewood, but the tree blew sparks onto us and made blisters." Rabbit pounded his club on the ground. "Close your eyes and turn round. Don't look." Ruffling their feathers, the little boys turned their back to Rabbit and closed their eyes. Bam! Bam! Rabbit struck the tree a severe blow. "Now," he declared, "even old women and little children will be able to gather your branches for fire." He raised his club again and this time attacked the stream. Bam! Bam! "Now even old women and children will be able to come to you when they need water. Grandsons, show me where the rock is that killed your mother." Strutting over to the boulder, Rabbit set his club down and bent way over so that only his little tail was in the air. He pushed and shoved until the huge stone rolled off the mourning dove. Rubbing her eyes, she yawned and stretched. "Oh, what a nice sleep," she cooed. "I was gathering yampa when that rock fell on top of me." She then gathered her sons and the yampa, and they all went home to eat. Rabbit continued on his way until he came to Tava, Pike's Peak, the last mountain range and the place where the sun came up. "Now, how am I going to kill the sun? He has eyes that see everywhere. When I am in one place, he sees and then jumps to the other side. My people are suffering and I must kill him." Someone was camped nearby, and he was singing. He stooped when he heard Rabbit talking to himself. "Let me help you," said Kagaki, Spider. "I can make a web over your hole and Sun cannot see you." Rabbit climbed into a hole and Spider spun his web. When Sun began to climb into the sky the next morning, bam, bam! His eyes would not find Rabbit, but Rabbit's club found him. Sun fell to the ground and everything was burning. Rabbit ran as fast as he could, just barely in front of the raging fire. "Trees, trees, save me! I killed Sun and set the world on fire. We can't help you, as we will only be ashes." "Stream, stream, save me! I killed Sun and set the world on fire. We can't help you, as soon as we will be as soon we will be only steam." Rabbit asked everyone for help, but no one could protect him. As he ran, he came to one little half-moon bush. "Little weed, can you help me?" "Yes, come hide under me. Fire will just go over me and make a noise." Rabbit just had time to dig under Little Weed's branches when the fire roared past. Unfortunately, Little Weed didn't completely cover his long ears or his tail. That's why they are black to this day. Little Weed is called Uanump, Rabbit Bush, because he saved Rabbit's life that day. Today, as people travel through the countryside and see the black roots, the lava, they say, "Oh, that is from the time that Rabbit killed the sun and set the world on fire." What I loved about this story is that there is a Kaelin explains that there is it's trying to explain a natural phenomenon that happened earlier. "Rabbit kills the sun," she writes, "is especially intriguing when you look at it as metaphor. Could it be an oral tradition documenting the Clovis comet, an event from 1300 years ago that killed off the Clovis people and caused the extinction of the mammoths? Among many people of the Aztec language family, you look carefully at all the full moon. Okay, sorry. Among many people of the Aztec language family, such as the Utes, Rabbit is a metaphor for the moon. If you look carefully at the full moon, you can see Rabbit's curved back along the left side as his head and long ears arc over the top and to the right. Does Rabbit killing the sun indicate a full eclipse of the sun at some time in the past? Did an eclipse precede the arrival of the Clovis comet? Are the fireballs from the comet actually the images used in the story of the sun falling to the earth and setting it on fire? So there is a need in humanity to define, to recount historical events and talk about them in creative and interesting ways. And these become our myths and legends, right? And so when we look at these stories, we read them so that we can understand what is being preserved and why. And so it seems necessary to try to explain why an entire people group as well as an animal were extinguished from the earth. And if it's because of a natural event like a comet hitting and causing a grave and serious and large natural disaster, there would be a desire to want to explain that in a certain way. This event had a profound impact on the lives and the psyche of the indigenous people at that time. This is why we tell stories. We will tell stories of 2020. We will tell stories of 2021. We tell stories of 9/11. We tell stories of things all the time. And so one of the things that I like is that in so many other traditions, there's a high elevation or there's a high esteem for myths and recounting and telling stories, while also understanding that Rabbit probably didn't actually kill the sun, but that Rabbit represents this moon, or maybe there was an eclipse, and then there was these other aspects. I think that we could do really well to learn from such a practice of engagement with myth and story when we're dealing with our own sacred text as Christians, and I'm speaking from a Christian perspective. All right. And so we have our own legends like the flood. Okay. And so one of the things about the flood that I find really, really super interesting is that we're not the only ones that have a flood narrative. In fact, Gilgamesh is a flood narrative, and Gilgamesh speaks to that area, that Fertile Crescent area that is common for flooding, and the flooding would be really massive and super significant. It's a Neo-Assyrian story about the idea of this flood that comes in and like wipes everyone out. And then in Gilgamesh specifically, interestingly enough, when you're looking at the overlap with our own, with that story of of Noah and the ark, it's almost identical, right? And so in the Gilgamesh story, and I've highlighted some aspects here, there's a command to demolish the house and build a boat, regardless of the cost, to keep living beings alive. All right, so Ea commanded Utnapishtim to demolish his house and build a boat. Okay, so there's this declaration, you need to go build this boat, there's something coming. Then there's the building and the launching of the boat, and you get some interesting overlaps as well here in the Gilgamesh story. There's 100, the cubits, the length is supposed to be 120 cubits, and then there's a drawing of the interior structure, and he's supposed to load it up with all the living beings that were around him. And so this 2/3 of the boat was in the water, and so there's these interesting aspects. There's a storm. The flood and wind lasted 6 days and 6 nights, flattening the land. On the 7th day, the storm was pounding intermittently like a woman in labor. And then after the storm, there's a release of a raven, and it did not circle back to the boat. And then he sent his livestock out in various directions, right? And so, wow, that sounds identical to the story that we have in I believe it's Genesis. And so does that mean that the story in Genesis is false and that we should reject everything that's in the Bible, or that we should just reject Christianity altogether because the flood story that's told in Genesis isn't the only one? No, that's ridiculous in my opinion. In fact, it actually means that it's speaking to something that did happen. We have overlaps of myths and legends. All right. We take from stories. In 2021, when I read the flood story, I might see some overlap and correlation between some of the flooding of, pandemics that are hitting our lands and the desire to want to save and preserve people, and that God wants that for me to do as a Christian in this world, that I should be with my eye to life, right? And so we can read the story, and in 50 years' time, the Noah story could be articulating something else. I know that I can't take the Noah story and necessarily apply what happened to here. No, there isn't a literal flood right now, but there is something that is occurring, right? And so we have this. We can look at our myths and not have to be so pent up about fact, right? Which I like to say that in Latin, fact just means something that happens in real time. Doesn't necessarily mean like the ultimate and epitome of truth. Stories always communicate to us things that are timelessly true, in that there's this what feels like an atmosphere of truth, in fact, is the bubbling up from era to era to era of things that are materially and tangibly true that reflect the truth that is sort of behind it. I know that sounds a little bit Heideggerian, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. So I'm going to read one more, and this is a short one, and this is one of my favorite ones, and it's called The Origins of the People. And I love this picture because I love little people escaping the bag. And so this is how we get different people groups, but I'm going to go ahead and read it. Long time ago, when the earth was young, all things in this world could speak. Animals could speak, the water could speak, the skies, the stars, the four-leggeds, and those with wings, even the little bugs. We shall make this world the way that it will be comfortable for those who are going to live here, the Indian people. He will then take care of it in the right way, because the instructions will come from us. For those are the words of the wisdom from the animals and all things around them. Thus are the stories that I'm going to tell. Off the bat, I am reminded of Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. There's an overlap in these ideas. And now, granted, in those stories, it is God. But remember, for the people, God is in everything. And these animals speaking are represent or are God in this environment, talking about the creation of humanity. And so getting at the question, that's what these stories are doing, getting at the question, why are we here? Because it actually makes more sense not to exist than to exist. And yet we tend to be so anthropocentric that we lean in the direction of thinking that we are here and that's what makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. Going on, the coyote will be the main character and his older brother, the wolf. Sunif, older brother, wolf, and Yahuwitz, coyote, lived in Karniv, a cloud teepee on top of Pikes Peak. Many, many moons ago to the south, a journey was to be made throughout the world into the high countries of this world. Sunif wanted to put the people here and there, so he made a little bag, and this he will pack on his back. And as he moves to the north, he will distribute these little people throughout the world. All will be placed in the right place on their own land, so they will not fight one another. He did not tell anyone what he was doing, but his brother Yahuwitz was a curious animal. In Indian stories, he was a trickster. He was curious, and he murmured, "Ayat, ayah, akay." What is he doing? The older brother was breaking these small twigs to small size and putting them in a bag, but the younger brother watched without getting too close. Now, the older brother, Sunif, decided to take a walk. And when he was gone, curiosity got the best of his younger brother, Yahuwitz. In the bag, he could hear people talking. There's music going on in the bag. He'd listen real carefully and he would say, Niahuk, what's it saying? What's in there? So he took his flint knife and he cut a little hole in the side of the bag. In the meantime, his older brother is gone, but he knew that he's getting close again. And when he looked in through the hole, the people saw him. There were people in there. The sticks had turned into people, and some jumped out and about. That time, the older brother came back again. Not knowing what had taken place, he put the bag on his back and Sunif moved on his journey. As he was going along, he'd be singing a song, like the heartbeat of the earth. The drums would be going and he'd be singing to that. Every once in a while, he would stop and reach in the bag and put some people down on the earth and say, you will live here. But as he went on, he noticed that the bag was getting lighter and he knew that he didn't put that many people out. Finally, when he got to the high place, way up in the mountains, he knew what was going on. There was a hole in the bag and all the people had jumped out, but the Ute and Hopi were still in there. He left them in there until they were fully ripe. He placed the Hopi on their land. Then he talked to the last of them that were ripe. They were now fully human. You, my people, you, my children, I'm going to put you over here. You will be called Utica, Utah, the Ute. You will live in these mountains, for these shining mountains will be your home. From here you will see across the plains to the east and to the north and to the west and to the south. And that's how the distribution was made and how the Utes were placed on the mountains. Then they dropped off all the people that were supposed to have been placed around, and those are the little tribes here and there, scattered to the south and to the west, and that's where we came from. I hope, like I did, I hope you heard these really beautiful overlaps with that creation story of something being created from a natural element. For us, it was the dirt, and that's where Adam comes from. Then Adam is picked up and placed into the garden. And here we have sticks that have been turned into people, and then they're distributed via a bag, a hole, actually. And then there's a couple of groups left, and they're specifically placed in certain spots and spoken to and given charge over the land. Our stories are not unique. And I really, really, really hope that you're okay with that, because it's actually really, really beautiful that they aren't unique. It's the mundane that becomes beautiful in the encounter with God, in the event of faith, right? And so we don't need unique stories to feel special. And too often Christians pride themselves on being the chosen, the special. And in America, we're in a lot of hot water in regards to those mythologies. Speaking of myths, fueling our westward expansion, stealing land from people, oppressing people, enslaving people, taking people from other land, making declarations about skin color, about gender, about sex, about who and what and everything. And so I think this is something that is challenged when we engage with myths and stories of other traditions. So many civilizations and people carry with them stories and myths, legends that communicate concepts and ideas and trying to engage and make sense of the world. And that's what stories do. It's us making sense of the world. These legends communicate through and specifically and with specifically fictional characters and narrative plots. Something that's very centric and true about the people who savored and shared these stories. A story tells a lot about a person, and stories tell a lot about a people group. We read and engage with these stories and legends, not to communicate that which is fact, as I've already often said and have already said, but to speak something true. When we watch movies and we read fiction, there's something that speaks to us. And when that thing stops speaking to us, it's the thing that gets left behind. But that these stories sort of surge through decades and hold people groups together. It's not because they're just clinging to this, like some more conservative evangelical Christians might cling to the creed or cling to, right, this form of understanding sin in terms of, whether or not you're biting your nails and making themselves pure. There's this passing on of the story in loose hands and letting the story live its own life in the era in which it's given. And for those of us reading as outsiders, we read these legends And I'm forced to reckon with that which is mostly unfamiliar, but yet familiar enough to ask questions. And I think being put in the place of asking questions is absolutely essential. This is why we study other religions, we study other traditions, we understand philosophy, we read stories. We need to understand that we do not have answers, but we certainly can have questions. And I think we have bought a bill of goods thinking that we have so many answers, and we don't have the answers, but we can ask questions. And something I've been encouraging people to do is to ask the questions: is this all we have? Is this really the best way? And I think the question is always dangerous, but if I convince you that you have the answer, and or tell you that I have the answer, I'm going to give it to you, then we create little echo chambers and we create little cults. And we certainly have some cultic problems in the United States. Through myth and legend, I am confronted with my presumptions of who and what I am and what I believe and hold true. I become, in the light of the story, exposed and am beckoned into the story and experience it as it tells me about others, not me telling it about them, and thus tells me about me. And so I'm exhorted to re-examine who I am. And I'm reminded of something that a scholar, Dr. John Flett, said to me once, and that is that the missionary is often the one that is first converted. And so this is the thing that is crucial for understanding mission. And Christians have done violence with their own concept of mission. But this idea that I am the one that is brought in, I am the one who is spoken to, I am the one that is having people tell me about them. I am the one converted. Reading through these stories wasn't merely entertaining, but unleashed a new dimension of bodily experience for me as I navigated my presence on the land that's not mine. And I live in Colorado. It's listen to these words of these legends. I'm reminded that I must listen, that I'm a visitor, that I own not the sole truth, that I am guilty and have participated in perception of the supremacy of my people, the white skin, and through violence of my faith, thinking my own myths are none are more legitimate than others. And that is one of the things that I kept reckoning with, was how much violence has been done, because my version of the myth of the flood had to be the myth, had to be the one, the truth. My God has to be the one God. My faith system has to be the one faith system. Everyone else doesn't understand it. And we see this actually, if you look into the factions of Christianity, no one else gets it but my group. And I like the challenge that I've been encouraged into recently, which is understanding that all these interpretations of Christianity are actually Christianity, failures or not. And I credit that with Marika Rose's work. My faith has done violence, and my stories have done violence, and private property has done violence, and capitalistic values have done violence, and all of it has been working together. And these stories and legends show me a better way, and mine is a responsibility not to dictate that way, but to ask what that way is, not to ensure that I know, but to confess through question that I know not. And this is something that's really important. That's what I like about the question. The question exposes that I know not. When we only say things and answers, we pretend that we know. And God, we do not know. We do not know. I want to close with a legend from the book. I hope you will have questions at the end of it. And so this is from page 115. Hold on. I just went past it. So I'm going to close with the story, and then I'm just going to end this, and I'll go away. All right. Origins of the people. Long time ago, when the earth was young, all things in this world could speak. Animals could speak. And oh, I've already read that. I've got ahead of myself. Anyway, with that said, I will let you be. I'm honored that you took the time to watch this and to listen. I'm glad that you stopped by, and I'm also glad that you're here. So thank you for your time and for your Saturday. And I hope you have a great day.